Hello, I'm Chris Merritt, and with me is the Federal Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus, and we're just back from the first ceremonial sitting of the Federal Circuit Court of Australia, newly rebranded from the Federal Magistrates Court. One of the most interesting things that happened at this ceremonial sitting was Mr. Dreyfus's address, where he mentioned his support for an independent special review of the remuneration of the judges. Mr. Dreyfus, what's behind it?
What's behind it is that there's been a recognition of the increase in complexity and breadth of the work of what is now called the Federal Circuit Court of Australia. As you've just said, Chris, it was called the Federal Magistrates Court and its members were magistrates. Now they are called judges, and it's the Federal Circuit Court of Australia.
Behind the title, so if the tribunal goes, if this review by the tribunal goes the way the judges would like, it could open the way for big pay rises for the judges. Is that one of the factors?
I'm not going to preempt what the Remuneration Tribunal, which is an independent tribunal that, among other things, looks at the remuneration and entitlements of all of the federal judicial officers, so that it sets the pay and entitlements of High Court judges, Federal Court judges, Family Court judges, and of course the Federal Circuit Court of Australia. And they do that review annually. They've indicated, and the judges of the Federal Circuit Court have asked them to consider whether they would do a special review outside that annual review process. What I've done, and I indicated in my speech today, was to express support for that special review taking place.
Will the government be making a formal submission to that review?
If necessary, we could, but it's really up to the Independent Remuneration Tribunal to make its own inquiries. That, of course, will involve talking to the judges of the court, forming a view about what the work is, because there's to some extent, a work value examination here to try to compare, and it's a very difficult comparison, you'd understand, the work that's done in this Federal Circuit Court with the work done in other federal courts.
It's grown enormously from when it was established, 20 years ago, I think.
It has. It's got 61 judges, and it's far and away the biggest of the courts in the federal system, and it's a very, very busy court indeed. As we heard today in the speeches at the ceremonial sitting, it's putting through in its workload about 100,000 cases a year. Now, not all of them obviously are proceeding to full hearing, but it gives you an idea of the busyness of the court, and a lot of the work has come to this court from the family court itself, and the cases that they're doing are more complex, broader cases than was envisaged when the court was first set up.
The judges are very keen on forming a link with the incomes of state district court judges. What's your view on that?
It hasn't been the practice of the Remuneration Tribunal up until now to make any direct links to the state court system. Obviously, for one reason, there aren't exact equivalences across as the level you've mentioned is the district court level. They're in a band, but some states pay their district court judges, or county court judges they're called in Victoria, a little bit more, some pay a little bit less. What we do have in the federal system at present is a proportion or ratio, if you like, that federal court judges and family court judges are paid around 85% of the pay of the high court judges. So there's a degree of relativity in there, and it may be that where the Remuneration Tribunal goes is to see whether it can get some kind of ratio between what the Federal Circuit Court judges are paid and the next level up, which is the Federal Court and the Family Court judges.
I see. Given the fact that we've got courts all over the place in this country, state and federal jurisdictions, and there's a war for talent effectively between the various courts, do you see this as a way of, if the decision goes the way the judges would like it to go, a way of helping the Federal Circuit Court get back into that war and actually grab some of the silks who are now going to
well, I don't
courts?
think it's ever been out of the war. There's a very fine lot of judges now serving on the Federal Circuit Court of Australia, and you're right to say that there's a degree of competition for the limited pool of legally qualified people who can become judges. That's the solicitors and barristers and legal academics, people with legal qualifications in our country who can serve. And of course there's going to be a little bit of competition, but one of the things that's looked at by the people responsible for fixing the state judicial salaries and the independent remuneration tribunal that fixes the judicial salaries at the federal level is keeping some level of relativity. I don't think I'd like to see a situation arrive where there was a huge discrepancy, because then you would get a problem about attracting the talent that's needed to serve on our courts.
This comes right after the government's proposed superannuation tax changes, which would have exempted every other judge in the country except the Federal Circuit Court judges. By what you've said about a review of their remuneration, do you see that as a way of making peace with this court?
I don't think there's any need to do anything of the kind with this court. The relations that I have with this court, I would hope, and the relations that the government has with this court are very fine. We've just put in place a very major reform of renaming the court, renaming the judges, and of course a whole lot of administrative reforms, implementing the Ski Hill suggestions about merging the administrative facilities of this court. I think that judges who serve on this court go into it knowing that the remuneration arrangements for the Federal Circuit Court of Australia are a salary plus generous superannuation arrangements. There's a payment of 15.4% superannuation by the Commonwealth as a superannuation payment for these judges. And that's considerably more generous than most of the Australian workforce.
I'll say.
So judges know when they go into this job on the Federal Circuit Court of Australia that those are the terms. There's a different arrangement with defined benefit pensions for the other federal judges, they being the judges of the High Court, the Federal Court and the Family Court. You're
seeing the head of the Remuneration Tribunal next week, I think, isn't it?
I meet with the head of the Remuneration Tribunal. I have met with him and I'm going to meet with him, as you say, next week.
Do you think there's a likelihood that we'll have this special review resolved one way or the other before the election?
The Remuneration Tribunal are usually pretty prompt. I think they'll want to keep this separate if they decide to proceed with it. They want to keep it separate from the annual review, which is a end of financial year proposition. So I'd be expecting them to be making a decision, conduct their review and make a decision on it relatively promptly if they decide to go forward with what we've called a special review.
Great, that's a good note to finish on.
Thanks, Chris.
We've been talking to Mark Dreyfus about the newest court in Australia, the Federal Circuit Court.